By now, everybody should absolutely know what Bank of America is doing with their new requirements for you to have a $1,500 balance or a $250 a month direct deposit, or you will be fined $12 a month to maintain an account with them. And yesterday on Like It or Not, I explained that it really isn't about that $12 a month at all. Let's start there. It is absolutely not about the $12 a month, because that is nothing compared to what Bank of America is able to get from the poorest people in society, people who are living on the edge. People, it's funny. There are levels to living on the edge. And in certain levels, I don't care. Like if you're making millions of dollars a year and you're living on the edge because you're consuming millions of dollars a year, I personally don't care to include you in this conversation. But a person who's making $15,000 a year and is living off of $20,000 a year, they're living clearly on the edge. And a person who's making $45,000 a year and they're living, and it costs $60,000 a year for them to live, they're clearly living on the edge. They're two distinctly different types of living on the edge. Right? There's a separation between it. I would compare it to living in poverty in Boston versus living in poverty in Atlanta. Living paycheck to paycheck in Boston rather versus living paycheck to paycheck in Atlanta. Right? Living paycheck to paycheck in Boston might have you in some really bad situations, some really bad neighborhoods. Some, you're not really, it's sketchy. Living paycheck to paycheck at $45,000 a year in Atlanta, as I look around and survey the land, it's like, it's a better living. But so there's a qualitative difference based on your income and on your location. However, the truth is the same. Whether you're making $45,000 a year and you're living edge to edge, check to check, or you're making $15,000 a year and you're living check to check, the banking industry is designed to make a profit off of all of us. Anyone that they can trap in the vicious cycle of overdraft fees. This has nothing to do with $12 a month. Nothing whatsoever, because that's a pittance compared to what they can get out of people living check to check, what they can get out of you vis-a-vis overdraft fees. $35 a pop. We were talking to callers yesterday on the 4 o'clock show, and one caller called in and spoke of how in one pay period, he had $175 of overdraft fees. And listen, the stigma around it is most people don't even want to admit that they're living that life. Most people don't want to admit that they're living in an existence where they're looked down upon and said, and people are saying that you don't manage your money right, or you're poor in general. Most people don't want to admit that they're poor. Matter of fact, for the people in the radio audience, I'm just making gestures as, look at me. Well, that's all I'll say. It's a reality that most people don't want to admit, because we're living in a society where you have to give the appearance of success all the time. No matter how poor you're living, you have to give the appearance of success, because that's encoded in our system. That is a mechanism to keep us trapped in this system, because if poor people and people living check to check and people living on the edge, no matter whether they're making $15,000 a year, $0 a year, or they're making $45,000 a year living check to check, if all the people realize how many other people are living that same exact existence, there would be a real revolution in the streets. And so part of the mechanism that keeps us from ever actually realizing how many people are living that existence is the shame, it's the stigma, it's the unwillingness to actually be the first to say that I am living in poverty and I'm living check to check and my situation is bad, and that this situation with Bank of America is perfectly designed to not get $12 a month out of me, but to get $200 a month out of me. Or no, I'm sorry, $175 per pay period. And that's precisely how we as the working class contribute to maintaining this system that exploits the working class. Nobody wants to tell you, the other person, that we're poor. And if people in the working class, and I know everybody in my audience that's listening to me is not necessarily poor. I have some really successful listeners. That's the only way I actually do the show, because I have listeners who actually can send significant checks every single month to make sure that we keep having these conversations. So I'm not trying to draw a distinction and a separation or put a wedge between the poorest in my audience and the people who are doing well, because the people who are doing well are be the ones who fund the revolution. But I am saying that it's time for us to start looking around to each other and realizing that we're not in this alone. Not only are we not in this alone, but we are in the vast majority. This is how the overdraft industry can become a billion-dollar industry. This is how banks, this is how they make money off of people who can't leave money in their banks for any significant time enough for the bank to actually loan it out and to make a profit off of it. Banks ostensibly make their money off of loaning the money that other people deposit. And if you're living check to check, you absolutely can't leave money in your account for more than one pay period. Matter of fact, how many of you in my audience actually have the experience of, as soon as you get the check, the next day it's gone? If not the day you get the check, it's gone. And that is the real reality of being in the working class, being in the lower middle class, and just making enough to get by. And yet we're ashamed to actually say it to each other. And so we really are living in a closeted society that of poverty, of poorness, because we are ashamed, because everybody on Facebook has to make sure that they look like they're making good money and that they're living their best life, and that everything is glorious and everything is fine. Everybody on Instagram has to show that how they're balling out of control. And this is quite literally how you become a millionaire, and then before you know it, you spend everything and you're right back down to poverty, because we have a keeping up with the Jones mentality that has been baked into our system, and it's such a useful tool for maintaining the system. And if we ever shake that stigma and we ever start, and perhaps we have to start with comedy and actually laughing about it for not crying. But if we ever start sharing the depth of the extent, if we ever start sharing the extent of poverty and living check to check and living in the overdraft life and having banks make billions of dollars off of you because you were in the overdraft last pay period. They hit you for $200 last pay period, and now you're in the overdraft again for the exact $200. So that means if they had not hit you with $200 of overdraft fees, then you wouldn't be in the overdraft this pay period. Talk to me, somebody. I'm like, I know Americans are living that life. How many Americans are? And that's the question. And that's a question that we probably won't get the answer to without a lot of research and actually removing the stigma, so people will admit to the fact that they're living an existence in which the banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and the rest of them are able to profit off of our poverty, profit off of our pain, specifically with the useful tool of overdraft fees. Let alone the entire system, right? This is not neglecting to talk about how the entire system is designed to make billions of dollars to get our last dollar. That's notwithstanding. The overdraft fee industry is a relatively new phenomenon in capitalism. And this is an addition to capitalism that is so punitive, specifically to people who have the least amount of money to spare, the least amount of room to make an error, right? Some people have enough money that if they make a financial mistake, they don't even notice it. But if you make a financial mistake, whether it's a $15 mistake, or maybe you got adventurous and you took your family out to get a $50 meal, shame on you for spending that $50, right? You got adventurous and now you're living in that life. You have no margin of error. No room for error. You cannot afford to make a $50 mistake. If you make a $50 mistake, that puts you in a vicious cycle where the banks are sitting there now waiting, because everything is electronic. There is no cash life anymore. There's no ability to live completely off without the debit cards that the banks generate. Everything about your life has to be run through some type of electronic payment system. And that's where the entire industry, the entire capitalistic system is designed. I mean, we're talking about Russell Simmons yesterday, ponying off the rush card on black communities specifically, but all of America in general, and how these prepaid debit cards are designed to do the exact same thing that banking institutions do to you. So now you've been locked out of the banking institutions, and now you're in an institution, a secondary institution that's designed to do the same exact thing to you. And they're all there lined up waiting to profit off of perpetual poverty. Let's read some comments from the comment section. Pixie the Moon said, I get a monthly check, SSDI, and 2/3 of it goes to bills and rent. If I had a car, I'd have exactly no money every month. Pagan Bear said, after all the stories I've read about Bank of America, I can't believe anyone goes to them willingly. And the problem, I'm glad you brought that up, because the reality of it is this $12 a month fee is very similar to the fees that you get at other banks, right? There are very few commercial banks that are designed to actually take care of their customers. You really have to go to like a credit union, and then some of those are questionable. So it's not just Bank of America. I mean, one of our viewers yesterday at the 4 o'clock show, they shared with us their experience, and we'll have to dig into it, verify it, and try to get more information on it. But they shared as an anecdote their experience of trying to cash a check, a paper check at Walmart, and Walmart refusing to cash the check because they owed Wells Fargo money. And so it used to be a time where if you were living check to check and you were in the overdraft, et cetera, you get a paper check, take that paper check to a check cashing store. Don't ask me how I know, or you can't ask me how I know. Hell, we have to get rid of that stigma. But you take that check to a check cashing store and you cash it, and you're able to still live even though you owe the bank $150. But now they're closing that loop, according to the anecdote given to us yesterday, which I have not confirmed or researched, but it sounds plausible enough for me to share with you right now. You like how I cover my ass, huh? But now they've closed the loop and said, you're trying to cash this check at Walmart. We're not going to cash it until you pay Wells Fargo. And there's got to be a tipping point, right? There's got to be a tipping point where they're asking themselves the question, how far can we push this? How far can we push the working class and the lower middle class to the point, where is our breaking point? Where is our breaking point where we collectively say, to hell with all this, burn the entire system down? And we don't even have to do it through violence. We simply can do it by not complying or participating in the system. If all the poorest people in America refuse to operate in these banking systems and found a way somehow, see, we will find a way to survive without it. How many people have reduced their consumption to basic living, right? And of course, I mean, everything, I just had like 30 thoughts in my head. I'm going to put all of them to the side so I can finish that first thought. How many of us have cut out all the frivolousness, all the extra clothes, all the extra anything? What is a vacation? What the hell is that? How many of us have cut out, all we have are the basic things that we need to survive, which include things that used to be considered as a perk, but we can't survive without internet now. We can't have a job without the internet, right? So we have the basics of living: house, rent, food, and the internet, and phones. We've reduced our consumption, and that's because we had to learn to live with the money that we have in a system that's designed to rape us economically every single day. Likewise, if we found a way to live like that, then there's going to become a breaking point where more Americans say we absolutely can't afford to participate in this banking system. The question is, where is that threshold? Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and the rest of them have calculated that it's nowhere near right now. It's nowhere near the overdraft fiasco. If you take anything away from this, I would say let's all stop being ashamed of sharing our poverty experiences. And some, as we talk about it, I remember a year ago, I asked my Twitter timeline to share their most embarrassing poverty moment. And I shared mine. Mine happened to be kind of cute because it involved me and my wife and dating my wife, but it was embarrassing. And then as we shared, my heart started to break at all the stories that like took my story, which was embarrassing, and multiplied it by 100-fold. And so there's pain in this poverty, there's grief, there's sadness, there's sorrow in this poverty, which is a part of some of the reason why we don't share these stories. But I honestly believe that in terms of actually making a difference, if we saw how many people are living this experience, one, we would start laughing about it in a therapeutic sense. We'd be like, oh, we're not alone. But then two, we could start scaring the absolute shit out of these institutions who are having a field day making a profit off of our poverty.